Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that the greatest obstacle in your life has never been another person. Not your past, not your failures, not your circumstances, but a voice that has lived inside your head since childhood. A voice that whispers, you must be right, you must be admired, you must win, you must become someone. Now imagine something even stranger. Imagine that the people who seem the strongest, the calmest, the wisest, spent their entire lives trying to silence that voice. Not because they were weak, but because they knew a secret that most of the modern world has forgotten. A secret so simple that it almost sounds impossible. The less they thought about themselves, the freer they became. Thousands of miles away on a quiet mountain in Japan, an old Zen master once handed a visitor a cup of tea. The visitor was famous, educated, respected. He had come seeking wisdom. As the master poured the tea, the cup became full, but he didn't stop. Tea spilled over the edges, it soaked the table, it dripped onto the floor. The visitor finally shouted, "Stop, the cup is already full." The old master smiled. So are you. Those 4 words have echoed through history, because the cup was never the lesson. The visitor was. And perhaps so are we. Every day, millions of people chase success, more money, more followers, more recognition, more proof that they matter. Yet anxiety keeps rising, depression keeps spreading, loneliness keeps growing. How can a world with more comfort than ever feel so restless? Here's the strange part. Ancient Japan predicted this centuries ago, long before neuroscience, long before psychology, long before social media. Japanese monks, warriors, artists, and philosophers all pointed toward the same invisible enemy, not other people, not society, not fate. The enemy lived inside, and they gave it many names. Pride, attachment, illusion. But today, we usually call it one word, ego. The word is everywhere. People blame their ego, they protect their ego, they build entire identities around it, but very few ever stop to ask, what exactly is the ego? Is it your confidence, your personality, your ambition, or is it something much more dangerous? The answer changes everything, because what if the ego isn't who you are, but who you've been taught to believe you are? What if the endless pressure to become important is the very thing keeping you trapped? Most people never notice the prison, because they've lived inside it for so long, it feels like home. Think back to being a child. There was a time when you laughed without worrying how you looked. You danced without wondering who was watching. You asked questions without fearing embarrassment. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You simply existed. Then something changed. Grades began to matter. Comparison began. Praise became addictive. Failure became embarrassing. Success became your identity. Slowly, without realizing it, you stopped living and started performing. Every compliment became fuel. Every criticism became pain. Every achievement became temporary. Because no matter how much you accomplished, it was never enough. The ego always wanted more validation, more certainty, more proof that you deserve to exist. Here's what makes the ego so powerful. It never announces itself. It doesn't knock on the door. It quietly disguises itself as common sense. When someone criticizes you, the ego says, defend yourself. When someone succeeds, the ego whispers, compare. When someone ignores you, the ego insists they don't respect you. It sounds protective, but it creates endless suffering. Imagine carrying an invisible backpack. Every insult, every regret, every victory, every title, every expectation, every fear gets placed inside year after year. The backpack becomes heavier. Soon, you're no longer walking through life. You're dragging your past behind you. But then, something extraordinary happened in medieval Japan. A group of people whose lives depended on survival discovered that fear disappears only when the ego disappears first. These people were samurai. Modern movies often portray them as fearless warriors, master swordsmen, symbols of honor, but history tells a deeper story. Before learning how to defeat an opponent, many samurai were taught to defeat themselves, not through violence, through discipline, because they understood a terrifying truth. A sword cannot save someone whose greatest enemy lives within. One moment of wounded pride could start a war. One moment of uncontrolled anger could end a family. One moment of arrogance could cost a life. So their greatest training wasn't physical, it was psychological. Every morning, some contemplated death, not because they wanted to die, but because remembering death made the ego smaller. If today could be your last, how much energy would you waste trying to impress strangers? How many arguments would suddenly feel meaningless? How many possessions would stop defining you? Death, ironically, made them feel more alive. But the samurai weren't alone. Far away from battlefields, hidden inside quiet temples, another group pursued the same freedom through an entirely different path. Zen monks. They owned almost nothing. Simple clothes, simple rooms, simple meals. To many outsiders, their lives appeared empty. Yet travelers often described them as remarkably peaceful. How? Because they weren't trying to become extraordinary. They were trying to become fully present. One sweeping movement, Spaß, one breath, one bowl of rice, one sound of rain. Nothing needed to be different. Nothing needed to be added. Imagine sitting beside a river. The water never argues with the rocks. It simply flows. It doesn't cling to yesterday's water. It doesn't fear tomorrow's current. It moves again and again and again. The Zen masters believed the human mind was different, not because it had to be, but because the ego refused to let it flow. Instead, it replayed old conversations, imagined future disasters, compared itself with everyone nearby. The body sat in one place. The mind traveled everywhere, except the present. Modern neuroscience now supports something remarkably similar. When the brain's default mode network becomes overly active, people tend to spend more time ruminating, comparing themselves with others, and replaying memories or imagined futures. These patterns are closely associated with stress, anxiety, and unhappiness. Centuries before brain scanners, Zen practitioners noticed the same pattern. They simply described it differently. The mind creates its own suffering, not because it is evil, but because it cannot stop telling stories. Stories about who you are, who you should become, who wronged you, who owes you, what you deserve. The ego feeds on these stories. Without them, it begins to fade. But this is where everything changes. If the ego is built from stories, who are you without them? Without your job, without your reputation, without your achievements, without your failures, without your name? Would anything remain? At first, that question sounds frightening, almost impossible, because most people have spent their entire lives building an identity. Removing it feels like disappearing. But ancient Japan offered a different possibility. Maybe letting go of the false self doesn't erase who you are. Maybe, for the first time, it reveals who you have been all along. And one ordinary man, walking into a silent Zen temple, was about to discover that truth in a way he never expected. He believed he had come searching for wisdom. He had no idea. He was about to lose the person he thought he was, the samurai who defeated themselves first. The man stood at the entrance of the temple. His expensive robes were spotless, his posture was perfect, his reputation stretched across the country, people admired him, students quoted him, nobles welcomed him. Yet inside, he carried a quiet storm. No one could see it, because ego rarely looks like arrogance. Sometimes it looks like success. He had spent decades becoming someone. Every achievement had earned him another title. Every victory had added another layer to his identity. But each new layer came with a hidden cost. The more he became, the more he feared losing it. Imagine balancing a priceless vase in your hands. At first, you're proud to own it. Then you become careful. Then anxious. Eventually, you stop enjoying it altogether. You spend all your energy trying not to drop it. That is what the ego does. It convinces us to build an identity, then forces us to protect it every waking moment. The temple doors slowly opened. An old monk appeared. His clothes were faded, his sandals were worn, his face carried deep lines from age, yet his eyes were astonishingly calm. They held the kind of silence that made words feel unnecessary. The visitor bowed. "I have spent my life seeking wisdom." The monk smiled. "Then why are you still carrying yourself?" The visitor frowned. "I don't understand." The monk turned around. Without another word, he began walking. The visitor followed. Neither spoke. Minutes passed. Only the sound of wind moving through bamboo filled the air. Finally, they reached a garden. No statues, no decorations, only rocks, sand, and silence. The monk picked up a wooden rake. He slowly drew perfect lines through the white gravel. The visitor watched impatiently. Surely, there had to be more than this. The monk looked up. "What are you thinking?" The visitor answered honestly. "I expected something greater." The monk nodded. "Exactly." Those single words struck deeper than any lecture, because expectation is one of the ego's favorite disguises. It constantly whispers, this moment isn't enough, this place isn't enough, you aren't enough. So we chase another destination, another promotion, another relationship, another achievement, believing happiness waits somewhere ahead, except it never does, because wherever we go, the ego quietly follows. Here's the strange part. Japan's greatest warriors understood this long before psychologists did. To many people, the samurai represented power, strength, fearlessness. But power without self-control was considered dangerous. A warrior who couldn't master his own mind wasn't truly a warrior at all. One of the most respected swordsmen in Japanese history was Miyamoto Musashi. He fought more than 60 duels. He was never defeated. Most people assume his greatest weapon was his sword. It wasn't. It was his mind. Musashi wrote something extraordinary. You may abandon your own body, but you must preserve your honor. At first glance, it sounds like a lesson about reputation, but that's not what he meant. Honor wasn't about impressing others. It was about remaining truthful to reality, without vanity, without fear, without illusion. Musashi often arrived late to duels, not because he was careless, and because he refused to let his opponent control his emotions. Imagine waiting for someone who challenged you. Minutes become an hour. Frustration grows, anger builds, your breathing changes, your thoughts race. Before the fight even begins, you've already lost control. Musashi knew something remarkable. The first battle always happens inside the mind, long before swords ever cross. Modern neuroscience tells a similar story. When emotions overwhelm us, the brain shifts away from rational decision-making. Stress narrows perception. Fear shortens patience. Anger blinds judgment. The samurai didn't need brain scans to understand this. They learned it through life and death. Every duel became an experiment. Every mistake carried consequences. Every emotion mattered, except there was another enemy even more dangerous than fear. Pride. Pride convinced warriors they couldn't lose. Pride ignored warnings. Pride rushed into battle. Pride underestimated opponents. History is filled with brilliant generals destroyed by a single sentence. I already know. The moment learning stops, growth stops. This is why Zen monks and samurai formed such an unlikely partnership. One carried a sword, the other carried silence, yet both were fighting the same invisible enemy, the false self. Many samurai spent hours sitting in meditation before touching a weapon. To outsiders, this seemed absurd. Shouldn't they practice combat instead? But the masters understood something deeper. A restless mind creates reckless hands. A calm mind creates precise action. Imagine throwing a stone into a still lake. The ripples spread everywhere. Now imagine looking into that same lake after the water becomes completely still. Only then can it reflect the sky. The human mind works much the same way. When constantly disturbed by anger, comparison, regret, or pride, reality becomes distorted. We stop seeing life. We only see our reactions to it. This idea appears again and again throughout Japanese philosophy, not because emotion is bad, but because attachment to emotion becomes suffering. A passing cloud doesn't damage the sky. Only when we mistake the cloud for the sky itself do we lose perspective. The ego makes exactly that mistake. It says, I am angry, I am a failure, I am successful, I am important. Zen quietly asks another question. Who is the I behind those thoughts? That question has echoed through temples for centuries, because once you begin searching honestly, something unexpected happens. The self becomes difficult to find. Your body changes every few years, your opinions change, your memories fade, your beliefs evolve, even your personality shifts over time. If everything changes, what exactly remains the same? The Japanese had a word that points toward this mystery. Mushin. It means no mind, not an empty brain, not unconsciousness, but a state where action flows naturally, without ego interrupting every moment. An archer releases the arrow, not thinking about victory, not fearing failure, only releasing. A calligrapher paints one perfect stroke, without forcing it, without hesitation, without self-consciousness. Complete presence. Imagine driving a familiar road. Suddenly you arrive home, barely remembering the journey. Your body knew exactly what to do. Now imagine living with that same effortless awareness, not only while driving, but while speaking, listening, working, loving, creating, responding. That is the direction Zen pointed toward, not becoming emotionless, becoming free. free from the constant narrator inside the mind, free from endless self-evaluation, free from the exhausting need to defend an imaginary identity. But then, a remarkable story spread across Japan. It wasn't about a famous emperor or a legendary battle. It was about a young samurai who believed he had mastered himself, until one ordinary insult revealed that he had mastered nothing at all. The lesson he learned would become one of the most powerful teachings in Japanese history. Because sometimes, the fastest way to discover your ego is to watch what happens when someone refuses to respect it. The insult that revealed everything. The young samurai believed he was ready. For years, he had trained before sunrise. His sword was fast, his body was disciplined, his name had begun to earn respect. People admired his confidence. Some even feared him. He thought he had conquered himself. But life has a strange way of exposing the truths we hide from ourselves. Sometimes, not through great tragedies, not through impossible challenges, but through something as small as a single sentence. One autumn morning, the samurai entered a crowded marketplace. Merchants called out their prices. Children laughed as they chased each other through the narrow streets. The smell of fresh rice drifted through the cool air. It seemed like an ordinary day, until an old man looked directly at him. The stranger smiled, then said quietly, "You carry your sword like a man who is afraid." The marketplace fell silent. The words were simple, but they struck like lightning. The samurai's face tightened, his heart raced, his hand instinctively moved toward the handle of his sword. One insult, one sentence, and years of discipline began to crumble. The old man did not move. He simply watched, almost as if he already knew what would happen next. The samurai demanded, "What did you say?" The old man repeated the words, even more calmly. "You are afraid." Now anger flooded the young warrior's mind. His breathing became heavier, his vision narrowed. Every person in the marketplace disappeared. There was only the insult, only the challenge, only the burning need to prove himself. Then the old man laughed, not loudly, not cruelly, almost gently. "You see?" The samurai froze. "You lost. I never touched my sword, but I controlled yours." The marketplace remained silent. The young warrior slowly removed his hand from the weapon. For the first time, he realized the battle had never been outside him. It had always been inside. Whether this story happened exactly as told no longer matters, because its lesson has survived for centuries, and its truth is timeless. The ego cannot tolerate disrespect. It treats criticism as danger. It mistakes disagreement for attack. It believes every challenge threatens its existence. Yet reality tells a different story. An insult is only sound. A criticism is only information. A disagreement is only another perspective. It is the ego that transforms these into personal wounds. Imagine standing beside a calm lake. Someone throws a pebble. Small ripples spread across the surface. Within moments, the water becomes still again. Now imagine the same pebble falling into a bucket already filled with storming water. The chaos grows, not because of the pebble, because of what was already there. The same is true for the human mind. Events do not always create suffering, they often reveal it. This is where ancient Japanese wisdom becomes surprisingly modern. Today, psychologists speak about emotional regulation, mindfulness, cognitive flexibility. Centuries ago, Zen masters taught nearly the same principle using different words. They encouraged people to observe emotions without becoming them. Notice anger, do not become anger. Notice fear, do not become fear. Notice pride, do not become pride. Simple, yet unbelievably difficult, because the ego constantly whispers, "This feeling is you." But is it? Think about the last time you were embarrassed. At that moment, it felt permanent. Hours later, the feeling faded. The next day, it became a memory. If emotions come and go, how can they define who you are? The Japanese understood something that many people spend an entire lifetime trying to discover. You are the sky. Your emotions are the weather. Storms arrive, storms leave. The sky remains. This idea appears throughout Zen poetry, not as philosophy alone, but as a way of living. One famous Zen saying tells us, "Let go or be dragged." Only 7 words. Yet they contain an entire lifetime of wisdom, because most suffering comes from holding on to praise, holding on to failure, holding on to old arguments, holding on to imagined futures, holding on to identities that no longer fit. Imagine trying to cross a river while carrying every stone you have ever picked up. Each stone represents a memory, a regret, an achievement, a fear, a title. At first, one stone seems harmless, then another, then another. Eventually, the weight becomes unbearable. The tragedy is not that life became heavier, it is that no one told you. You were allowed to put the stones down. The Zen monks knew this. That is why many temples were built around gardens rather than monuments. A garden changes every season. Leaves fall, flowers bloom, snow arrives. Nothing tries to remain the same. Nature does not cling to yesterday. Only humans do, and perhaps that is why nature often feels peaceful. It accepts change without resistance. The ego fights it. Every wrinkle becomes an enemy. Every failure becomes an identity. Every ending feels like injustice. Yet, the Japanese found beauty in endings. They even created words that celebrate impermanence. One of the most beautiful is mono no aware. It describes the gentle sadness that comes from knowing everything is temporary. Cherry blossoms are breathtaking, not because they last forever, but because they don't. For only a few days each spring, Japan is covered in delicate pink flowers. Crowds gather beneath the trees, families laugh, children play, friends share meals. Then, the petals begin to fall. Within days, the branches are empty again. Some people see loss. The Japanese often see gratitude, because impermanence gives beauty its meaning. Imagine if cherry blossoms never fell. Would anyone stop to admire them? Or would they simply become another ordinary tree? Life works the same way. The ego demands permanence. Zen teaches appreciation. The ego says, keep this forever. Life quietly replies, you never could. But here's the strange part. Accepting impermanence does not make life sadder. It makes each moment infinitely more valuable. Every conversation becomes precious. Every sunrise becomes unique. Every embrace becomes unforgettable. Not because it will last, because it won't. This realization transformed not only monks, but artists, poets, tea masters, even swordsmiths. Each devoted themselves completely to the present task, not because they expected perfection, because presence itself became the reward. And hidden within one simple Japanese ceremony, a ritual involving nothing more than tea, lay perhaps the greatest lesson ever taught about defeating the ego. A lesson so profound that even powerful rulers removed their swords before entering the room, because inside that tiny space, no titles mattered, no wealth mattered, no victories mattered. Only one question remained. Who are you? When there is no one left to impress. The room where kings became equals. The room was smaller than most people imagined. No golden walls, no magnificent throne, no glittering treasures, just wood. Paper screens, a simple flower, a hanging scroll, and a single iron kettle gently steaming over the fire. Nothing about the room suggested power. Yet some of the most powerful men in Japan entered it with quiet footsteps. Generals, wealthy merchants, samurai, even rulers whose commands could move entire armies. Before they crossed the entrance, something remarkable happened. They removed their swords. Imagine that for a moment. A weapon that represented status, authority, identity. Left outside the door, inside, everyone became simply another human being. No one outranked anyone else. No one could command. No one could threaten. The tea room erased hierarchy before a single word was spoken. It was one of the most subtle revolutions in Japanese history, because the ceremony was never really about tea. It was about stripping away the masks people wore every day. The Japanese tea ceremony, chanoyu, was refined over centuries, especially by the Zen tea master Sen no Rikyu. To an outsider, it might seem painfully slow. Water is heated, tea is prepared, the bowl is turned, a sip is taken, silence fills the room, nothing dramatic happens, and yet, everything happens. Because for the first time in a long while, no one is trying to impress anyone. Think about how many moments in an ordinary day are spent performing, choosing the right words, trying to appear successful, trying to sound intelligent, trying to avoid looking weak, trying to win approval. Most conversations become performances without us even noticing. The ego is always on stage, always adjusting the costume, always worried about the audience. But inside the tea room, the performance ended. There was no audience, only presence. Sen no Rikyu believed that true beauty lived in simplicity, not because luxury was evil, but because excess often distracted the mind. Imagine walking into two different homes. The first is filled with expensive furniture, rare paintings, golden decorations. Everything competes for your attention. The second contains almost nothing. A wooden table, soft light, fresh flowers, silence. Which room allows your mind to breathe? The answer reveals something important. The ego loves more. The soul often needs less. This doesn't mean everyone should abandon their possessions. That was never the lesson. The lesson was subtler. Own things. Don't let things own you. There is a story about Sen no Rikyu that perfectly captures this idea. A wealthy nobleman invited him to visit his magnificent garden. The nobleman had spent years designing it. Every stone had been carefully placed, every tree perfectly trimmed, every flower arranged to impress visitors. Before the tea ceremony began, Rikyu quietly walked through the garden. He stopped beneath a cherry tree. He gently shook one branch. A handful of blossoms drifted to the ground. Nothing more. The nobleman was horrified. "Why would you ruin perfection?" Rikyu smiled. "Now it is complete." The scattered petals transformed the garden. It no longer looked controlled. It looked alive. Nature had entered the design. Imperfection had revealed beauty. This idea became known as Wabi-Sabi, perhaps one of the most misunderstood concepts in Japanese culture. Many people think it simply means appreciating imperfect objects. Cracked bowls, weathered wood, old buildings. But Wabi-Sabi goes much deeper. It asks an unsettling question. What if perfection itself is the illusion? Look closely at a mountain. It isn't symmetrical. Look at the ocean. Its waves never repeat. Look at an old tree. Its branches twist in unpredictable directions. Nature never chases perfection. Only the ego does. The ego wants flawless skin, a flawless career, a flawless reputation, a flawless life. And because perfection does not exist, the ego remains permanently dissatisfied. Imagine trying to smooth every wave in the ocean. The harder you try, the more exhausted you become. Eventually you realize the problem was never the ocean. It was the expectation. Modern psychology calls this perfectionism. Research consistently shows that chronic perfectionism is linked to anxiety, burnout, depression, and persistent dissatisfaction. Ancient Japan discovered the same truth without laboratories. People suffer not because they are imperfect, because they refuse to accept imperfection. A cracked tea bowl became more valuable than a flawless one, not despite the crack, because of it. When a treasured bowl broke, Japanese artisans often repaired it using lacquer mixed with powdered gold. This art became known as Kintsugi. Instead of hiding the damage, they illuminated it. The fracture became the most beautiful part. Imagine applying that philosophy to human life. What if your failures weren't stains to erase, but lines of gold? What if heartbreak deepened compassion? What if loss created wisdom? What if mistakes shaped character? The ego insists that scars diminish value. Kintsugi quietly answers, no, they reveal the story. Think about the people who have changed your life the most. Were they perfect, or were they honest about their imperfections? Usually, it is the second. Perfection creates distance. Authenticity creates connection. The ego fears vulnerability because it believes weakness invites rejection, but reality often works in the opposite direction. People trust what is real, not what is flawless. This explains something fascinating about Japanese craftsmanship. A master swordsmith might spend decades refining a blade, not to become famous, but to honor the work itself. A carpenter could devote his life to building temples, knowing no one would ever remember his name. A gardener might spend 50 years caring for trees planted for generations he would never meet. Why? Because purpose was found in the act, not the applause. The ego asks, what will I get? Mastery asks, how well can I serve? That single shift changes everything. Imagine two musicians playing the same song. One hopes for applause, the other is completely absorbed in the music. Who enjoys the performance more? Who feels freer? The difference isn't talent, it's attachment. The first performs for identity, the second performs for expression. This is where ancient Japanese wisdom meets one of modern psychology's most celebrated discoveries. When people become fully immersed in meaningful activity, they often enter what psychologists call a flow state. Time seems to disappear. Self-consciousness fades, action feels effortless, performance improves naturally. Interestingly, the experience has one defining characteristic. The ego becomes quiet. For a brief moment, there is no constant inner commentator judging every move. Only action, only presence, only life unfolding. The Zen masters smiled at this idea centuries before science gave it a name. They simply called it being completely here. But then, a wandering monk told a story so strange, so unexpected, that it challenged everything people believed about success. It wasn't about becoming somebody, it was about disappearing completely. And the man at the center of that story would eventually discover that the greatest freedom in life begins the moment you stop trying to prove that you matter. The man who disappeared. The monk arrived without an announcement. No servants walked beside him, no students carried his belongings, no banners announced his wisdom. He carried only a small cloth bag, inside it a bowl, a few worn clothes, and a brush for writing. Nothing more. As he entered a small village, no one recognized him. Children ran past without looking. Merchants continued selling their goods. Farmers worked the fields. To the world, he was invisible. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Imagine spending your entire life trying to be noticed, trying to build a reputation, trying to leave a mark, then meeting someone who has abandoned all of that, yet seems happier than anyone you've ever known. How is that possible? The monk stayed at a humble temple for several days. Each morning he swept the courtyard before sunrise. He fetched water, prepared meals, cleaned the floors. He accepted the smallest tasks without complaint. Visitors assumed he was merely an assistant. No one suspected that he was one of the most respected Zen teachers in the country. One afternoon, a wealthy official arrived. He had traveled hundreds of miles to meet the famous master. He entered the temple with excitement. "I have come to learn from the great teacher." The monk smiled. "He is nearby." The official waited. Minutes passed. An hour passed. The monk continued sweeping leaves. Finally, the official grew impatient. "When will the master arrive?" The monk rested the broom against the wall. "I have been here the whole time." The official stared in disbelief. "You? You've been sweeping the ground." The monk nodded. "Yes." The official looked confused. "But why would a great master do such ordinary work?" The monk asked quietly, "What work isn't ordinary?" Silence filled the courtyard. The official had no answer, because the question had shattered one of his deepest assumptions. The ego divides the world into important and unimportant, prestigious and insignificant, success and failure, high status and low status. Zen sees something entirely different. Every moment deserves complete attention, whether you are leading a nation or washing a bowl. The quality of your awareness matters more than the title attached to the task. Here's the strange part. Modern life teaches almost the opposite. People often ask, "What do you do?" Long before they ask, "Who are you?" a career becomes an identity. A paycheck becomes self-worth. A job title becomes a measure of value. Without realizing it, people begin introducing themselves through roles. I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a manager. These descriptions may be true, but are they the whole truth? Imagine losing that title tomorrow. Who remains? For many people, that question feels terrifying, not because they have lost a job, because they have lost the story that defined them. The Japanese have long understood that identity can become a prison. One of the reasons Zen monks changed temples throughout their lives was to avoid becoming attached, even to the image of being a wise monk. Every attachment creates another chain. Every label creates another wall. Every certainty becomes another limitation. The ego loves labels, because labels create permanence. But life refuses to stay permanent. A mountain slowly changes shape. A river never carries the same water twice. Even the stars above us are constantly moving. Nature never says, "This is who I must always be." Only humans make that demand of themselves. This truth became especially important during the lives of Japanese craftsmen. Imagine a man who spends 50 years carving wooden statues, not for fame, not for wealth, not even for recognition. Many of his finest works would remain unsigned. Future generations would admire the craftsmanship without ever knowing his name. To the modern mind, that sounds almost unbelievable. Why dedicate your life to something if no one remembers you? The answer reveals one of the deepest differences between ego and purpose. The ego works for applause. Purpose works because the work itself is meaningful. A flower does not bloom to receive compliments. It blooms because blooming is its nature. The sun does not rise to earn admiration. It rises because that is what it does. The river does not flow to impress the ocean. It simply flows. What if human beings are meant to live the same way? Not chasing approval, not performing for attention, simply expressing what is already within them. Psychologists have discovered something fascinating. People who are primarily motivated by external rewards, money, praise, status, or recognition, often experience less lasting satisfaction than those driven by intrinsic motivation, meaning, curiosity, or service. The findings surprised many researchers. Ancient Japan would not have been surprised at all. Zen had been pointing toward this truth for centuries. The happiest moments often arrive when we completely forget ourselves. Think about the last time you became absorbed in something you loved. Maybe it was painting, writing, gardening, playing music, walking through a forest, watching the rain. For a little while, the constant voice inside your head disappeared. You weren't asking, how do I look? What will people think? Am I succeeding? There was only the experience itself. And somehow, that felt enough. The ego calls that disappearance a loss. Zen calls it freedom. But then, the monk offered one final lesson to the official. A lesson so simple that it almost sounded disappointing. They walked together toward a nearby stream. The monk picked up a bucket. He filled it with water. Then he poured it onto the roots of a young tree. Nothing extraordinary happened. The tree did not suddenly grow. The sky did not open. No miracle appeared. The monk simply smiled. You don't pull the tree to make it taller. The official frowned. Of course not. You water it. The monk nodded. Then why do people pull at their own lives every day? The words settled into the silence. The official began to understand. Most people force happiness, force success, force respect, force love, force purpose, and in doing so, they damage the very thing they hope to grow. Nature teaches another way. Growth is patient. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be commanded. It can only be nurtured. The Japanese call this quiet, continuous improvement Kaizen. Many people know Kaizen as a business philosophy, but long before it transformed companies, it reflected something much deeper. Life changes through countless small actions, not dramatic transformations. One kind word, one honest conversation, one moment of patience, one humble decision, one peaceful breath, again and again and again. Again, the ego dreams of overnight greatness. Wisdom trusts the next small step, but hidden inside another ancient Japanese idea was perhaps the greatest challenge of all. It asked people to face the one thing the ego fears more than failure, more than rejection, even more than death. It asked them to embrace emptiness. And for almost everyone, that sounded impossible. I wrote them in a hat. The power of emptiness. Imagine walking into a room. There are no paintings on the walls, no furniture, no decorations, no music, just silence. For many people, the room feels uncomfortable, almost unsettling. The first instinct is to fill it. A chair, a table, a television, anything to erase the emptiness. Now imagine the same thing happening inside your mind. A quiet moment appears. No notifications, no conversations, no deadlines, no distractions. What happens? For many of us, the hand reaches for a phone almost automatically. The mind searches for noise because silence has become unfamiliar. Here's the strange part. Ancient Japan believed that our fear of emptiness reveals something profound, not about the world, but about ourselves. The ego cannot survive in silence for very long. It needs constant activity, constant comparison, constant stimulation, constant stories. Without them, it begins to fade. This is why Zen monasteries often appeared almost empty. Simple rooms, simple gardens, simple meals. Nothing was missing. Everything unnecessary had simply been removed. The purpose wasn't deprivation, it was clarity. Imagine trying to admire the stars in the middle of a city filled with bright lights. You can't. The stars haven't disappeared. The noise has hidden them. The mind works the same way. Wisdom rarely shouts, it whispers. But the ego is loud, it argues, it demands, it complains, it compares, it predicts disasters, it relives old victories, and because its voice is so constant, most people mistake it for themselves. A young monk once asked his teacher, "Master, how do I find peace?" The teacher pointed toward an old pond. "What do you see?" "My reflection." The teacher picked up a stick and stirred the water. The reflection vanished. "What do you see now?" "Only ripples." The teacher waited. Slowly, the water became still again. The reflection returned. The teacher smiled. "I did not repair the reflection. I simply stopped disturbing the water." The lesson was breathtaking in its simplicity. Peace is not something we manufacture. It is what remains when unnecessary disturbance ends. Think about how often the mind disturbs itself. A conversation from 3 years ago, an argument that ended months ago, a mistake made in childhood, an imaginary future that may never happen. The body exists in one moment. The mind wanders through thousands. Modern neuroscience has discovered something remarkable. The human brain spends a surprising amount of time thinking about anything except the present moment, and the more it drifts into endless rumination, the less satisfied people often become. Centuries before brain imaging existed, Zen teachers noticed exactly the same pattern, only they described it with poetry instead of data. You cannot drink from a river while chasing yesterday's water. Another Japanese idea captures this beautifully. It is called ma. At first glance, the word seems almost impossible to translate. It means the space between things, the silence between notes, the pause between breaths, the empty space inside a room. Most cultures focus on objects. Japanese aesthetics often focus on the spaces surrounding them. Imagine listening to your favorite piece of music. Now remove every pause, every moment of silence, every breath. Only non-stop sound remains. It wouldn't be music anymore, it would become noise. The silence gives meaning to the notes. Life follows the same principle. Without rest, work loses meaning. Without endings, beginnings lose significance. Without stillness, movement becomes chaos. The ego hates empty space because it mistakes stillness for failure. If you're sitting quietly, it whispers, you should be doing something. If you're resting, it says you're falling behind. If you're alone, it asks, why aren't you more successful? The ego measures life by constant motion. Wisdom measures life by depth. There is an old Zen story about a famous painter. A wealthy man asked him to create the perfect painting of a bamboo forest. The painter accepted. Then he disappeared. Months passed. The wealthy man grew impatient. A year passed. Still no painting. Finally, after nearly 2 years, the painter returned. He unrolled a blank sheet of paper. He closed his eyes. His brush moved for less than 5 minutes. When he finished, the bamboo seemed alive. Every leaf carried movement. Every stalk appeared to sway in an invisible wind. The wealthy man stared in amazement. 5 minutes? The painter smiled. No. 2 years and 5 minutes. The masterpiece wasn't created by the brush. It was created by the life behind the brush. The ego wants immediate results. Reality honors quiet preparation. How many people quit learning because they don't become experts in a month? How many abandon dreams because success arrives slowly? How many compare their first chapter to someone else's 20th? Nature never rushes. A seed buried underground appears to be doing nothing. Weeks pass, nothing. Months pass, still nothing. Yet beneath the surface, an invisible miracle is taking place. Roots are growing. Strength is developing. The foundation is expanding. Then one morning, a tiny green shoot breaks through the soil. People celebrate the moment they can see. Nature celebrates the months nobody noticed. Human life often unfolds the same way. Growth is invisible before it becomes obvious. The ego wants applause during the unseen work. Wisdom finds joy in the work itself. But perhaps the greatest lesson about emptiness comes from one of Japan's most famous symbols, the bamboo. Stand beside a mighty oak during a storm. Its massive branches resist the wind. Sometimes they snap. Now look at bamboo. It bends, it sways, it almost seems weak. Yet after the storm passes, the bamboo is still standing. Strength is often mistaken for rigidity. True strength is flexibility. The ego refuses to bend. It insists on being right. It clings to opinions. It defends every mistake. It fears admitting weakness. Wisdom bows. It listens. It adapts. It learns. The Japanese have admired bamboo for centuries, not because it never faces storms, but because it survives them. Perhaps the strongest person in the room is not the loudest, not the richest, not the most admired. Perhaps the strongest person is the one who no longer needs to prove their strength. And then, a wandering Zen master asked a quest so simple that his students laughed, until they realized it would take the rest of their lives to answer. He asked, "Before you were given your name, who were you?" The room fell silent, because every answer depended on a story. Every story depended on an identity, and every identity could disappear. The students thought they had spent years learning Zen. In that single moment, they realized they had only been standing at the door. Beyond it waited the deepest mystery of all. Not how to control the ego, but how to discover the self that had existed long before the ego was ever born. The power of emptiness. Imagine walking into a room. There are no paintings on the walls, no furniture, no decorations, no music, just silence. For many people, the room feels uncomfortable, almost unsettling. The first instinct is to fill it. a chair, a table, a television, anything to erase the emptiness. Now imagine the same thing happening inside your mind. A quiet moment appears. No notifications, no conversations, no deadlines, no distractions. What happens? For many of us, the hand reaches for a phone almost automatically. The mind searches for noise because silence has become unfamiliar. Here's the strange part. Ancient Japan believed that our fear of emptiness reveals something profound, not about the world, but about ourselves. The ego cannot survive in silence for very long. It needs constant activity, constant comparison, constant stimulation, constant stories. Without them, it begins to fade. This is why Zen monasteries often appeared almost empty. Simple rooms, simple gardens, simple meals. Nothing was missing. Everything unnecessary had simply been removed. The purpose wasn't deprivation, it was clarity. Imagine trying to admire the stars in the middle of a city filled with bright lights. You can't. The stars haven't disappeared. The noise has hidden them. The mind works the same way. Wisdom rarely shouts, it whispers. But the ego is loud, it argues, it demands, it complains, it compares, it predicts disasters, it relives old victories, and because its voice is so constant, most people mistake it for themselves. A young monk once asked his teacher, "Master, how do I find peace?" The teacher pointed toward an old pond. "What do you see?" "My reflection." The teacher picked up a stick and stirred the water. The reflection vanished. "What do you see now?" "Only ripples." The teacher waited. Slowly, the water became still again. The reflection returned. The teacher smiled. "I did not repair the reflection. I simply stopped disturbing the water." The lesson was breathtaking in its simplicity. Peace is not something we manufacture. It is what remains when unnecessary disturbance ends. Think about how often the mind disturbs itself. A conversation from 3 years ago, an argument that ended months ago, a mistake made in childhood, an imaginary future that may never happen. The body exists in one moment. The mind wanders through thousands. Modern neuroscience has discovered something remarkable. The human brain spends a surprising amount of time thinking about anything except the present moment, and the more it drifts into endless rumination, the less satisfied people often become. Centuries before brain imaging existed, Zen teachers noticed exactly the same pattern, only they described it with poetry instead of data. You cannot drink from a river while chasing yesterday's water. Another Japanese idea captures this beautifully. It is called ma. At first glance, the word seems almost impossible to translate. It means the space between things, the silence between notes, the pause between breaths, the empty space inside a room. Most cultures focus on objects. Japanese aesthetics often focus on the spaces surrounding them. Imagine listening to your favorite piece of music. Now remove every pause, every moment of silence, every breath. Only non-stop sound remains. It wouldn't be music anymore, it would become noise. The silence gives meaning to the notes. Life follows the same principle. Without rest, work loses meaning. Without endings, beginnings lose significance. Without stillness, movement becomes chaos. The ego hates empty space because it mistakes stillness for failure. If you're sitting quietly, it whispers, you should be doing something. If you're resting, it says you're falling behind. If you're alone, it asks, why aren't you more successful? The ego measures life by constant motion. Wisdom measures life by depth. There's an old Zen story about a famous painter. A wealthy man asked him to create the perfect painting of a bamboo forest. The painter accepted. Then he disappeared. Months passed. The wealthy man grew impatient. A year passed. Still no painting. Finally, after nearly 2 years, the painter returned. He unrolled a blank sheet of paper. He closed his eyes. His brush moved for less than 5 minutes. When he finished, the bamboo seemed alive. Every leaf carried movement. Every stalk appeared to sway in an invisible wind. The wealthy man stared in amazement. 5 minutes? The painter smiled. No. 2 years and 5 minutes. The masterpiece wasn't created by the brush. It was created by the life behind the brush. The ego wants immediate results. Reality honors quiet preparation. How many people quit learning because they don't become experts in a month? How many abandon dreams because success arrives slowly? How many compare their first chapter to someone else's 20th? Nature never rushes. A seed buried underground appears to be doing nothing. Weeks pass, nothing. Months pass, still nothing. Yet beneath the surface, an invisible miracle is taking place. Roots are growing. Strength is developing, the foundation is expanding. Then one morning, a tiny green shoot breaks through the soil. People celebrate the moment they can see. Nature celebrates the months nobody noticed. Human life often unfolds the same way. Growth is invisible before it becomes obvious. The ego wants applause during the unseen work. Wisdom finds joy in the work itself. But perhaps the greatest lesson about emptiness comes from one of Japan's most famous symbols, the bamboo. Stand beside a mighty oak during a storm. Its massive branches resist the wind. Sometimes they snap. Now look at bamboo. It bends, it sways, it almost seems weak. Yet after the storm passes, the bamboo is still standing. Strength is often mistaken for rigidity. True strength is flexibility. The ego refuses to bend. It insists on being right. It clings to opinions. It defends every mistake. It fears admitting weakness. Wisdom bows. It listens. It adapts. It learns. The Japanese have admired bamboo for centuries, not because it never faces storms, but because it survives them. Perhaps the strongest person in the room is not the loudest, not the richest, not the most admired. Perhaps the strongest person is the one who no longer needs to prove their strength. And then, a wandering Zen master asked a question so simple that his students laughed, until they realized it would take the rest of their lives to answer. He asked, "Before you were given your name, who were you?" The room fell silent, because every answer depended on a story. Every story depended on an identity, and every identity could disappear. The students thought they had spent years learning Zen. In that single moment, they realized they had only been standing at the door. Beyond it waited the deepest mystery of all. Not how to control the ego, but how to discover the self that had existed long before the ego was ever born, before you had a name. The question lingered in the air. No one answered. Not because the students lacked intelligence, but because every answer that came to mind had a name attached to it. I am a teacher. I am a father. I am a daughter. I am successful. I am a failure. I am kind. I am strong. Every answer began with a story. The old Zen master quietly shook his head. No. The students looked at one another in confusion. One finally asked, "Then who are we?" The master smiled. "That is the only question worth your entire life." Silence settled over the temple. Outside, the wind carried fallen leaves across the stone path. Inside, something invisible had begun to crack. Not the walls, not the floor, the students' certainty. For years, they had come to the monastery believing they were collecting wisdom, learning new teachings, memorizing ancient sayings, perfecting meditation. Now they realized wisdom wasn't something to collect. It was something that remained after everything false had been removed. Imagine a sculptor standing before a massive block of marble. Someone asks, "How will you create such a beautiful statue?" The sculptor answers, "I won't create it. I'll remove everything that isn't the statue." That answer sounds impossible. Yet perhaps human transformation works the same way. Most people spend life adding more possessions, more achievements, more followers, more opinions, more identities. Zen asks a startling question. What if freedom doesn't come from adding, but from removing? Removing resentment, removing comparison, removing fear, removing the desperate need to always be right, removing the image you've spent years trying to protect. Suddenly, the journey becomes very different. You're no longer becoming someone, you're uncovering someone. This idea has echoed through Japanese monasteries for centuries. Not because monks wanted people to abandon life, but because they wanted them to experience it directly, without the constant filter of ego. Think about the last beautiful sunset you witnessed for a few moments. Perhaps you weren't thinking about your job, or your reputation, or yesterday's argument. There was only color, only light, only wonder. Then the mind returned. I should take a picture. I wonder how many likes this would get. I wish this moment would last forever. The experience changed, not because the sunset disappeared, because the ego entered the scene. It immediately began turning a living moment into a possession. Here's the strange part. Modern psychology has discovered something remarkably similar. Researchers studying awe have found that moments of profound wonder often reduce self-focus. People report feeling connected to something larger than themselves. Time seems to slow. Personal worries shrink. The ego becomes quieter. Whether standing beneath the stars, watching waves crash against a cliff, or holding a newborn child, something extraordinary happens. The boundaries of the self begin to soften. Centuries before scientific journals, Zen masters deliberately created experiences that produced the same effect. A silent mountain walk, a carefully arranged rock garden, a single flower in an empty room. Not to entertain the mind, but to free it. The ego constantly asks, "What does this mean for me?" Wonder asks no questions. It simply looks. This may explain why children experience joy so easily. Watch a child chasing butterflies. They aren't thinking about productivity or status or whether they're wasting time. They're completely absorbed. Not because childhood is perfect, because the ego has not yet built all of its walls. As adults, those walls become higher, brick by brick. Every disappointment adds another layer. Every betrayal adds another. Every success sometimes adds the tallest wall of all, because success can quietly become identity. Imagine climbing a mountain. You finally reach the summit. The view is breathtaking. You feel alive. Then a new mountain appears on the horizon. The ego points toward it. Not enough. You climb again. Another summit, another brief moment of satisfaction. Then another mountain, another race, another comparison. The horizon never ends. The problem was never the mountains. The problem was believing peace waited at the top. The Japanese understood this through a concept known as shoshin. It means beginner's mind. At first, it sounds simple. Approach life with curiosity, stay open, remain teachable. But hidden inside those words lies a radical challenge. The beginner has nothing to defend, no reputation, no certainty, no image of being an expert. The ego hates this. It would rather be confidently wrong than humbly curious. The beginner asks questions. The ego pretends to have answers. Think about how many arguments begin with one invisible sentence. I already know. The moment those words appear, learning quietly leaves the room. One brilliant university professor traveled across Japan to study Zen. He arrived carrying books, notes, years of education. He believed he was prepared. The elderly master welcomed him warmly. They sat together. Tea was served. As the professor explained everything he knew about philosophy, the master silently poured tea into his cup. The tea reached the top, then overflowed. The professor jumped back. The cup is full. The master nodded. So are you. The story has survived because it reflects a truth that never grows old. Knowledge alone cannot transform a person. Only openness can. A full cup cannot receive fresh water. A full mind struggles to receive fresh insight. How often do we enter conversations, not to understand, but to be understood? How often do we listen only long enough to prepare our reply? The ego hears words. Presence hears people. This difference changes relationships. Imagine two friends sitting together. One waits for their turn to speak. The other listens so completely that the first person finally feels seen. The second person offers no brilliant advice, no clever solution, only attention. Sometimes, that is enough. The Japanese have long regarded attention as a form of respect. To be fully present with another person, without constantly returning the conversation to yourself, is one of the quietest expressions of love. The ego says, "Look at me." Compassion says, "I see you." Those four words contain entirely different worlds. But then, the master gave his students one final exercise. It seemed absurd. For 7 days, they were forbidden to speak about themselves. No stories, no achievements, no complaints, no opinions unless absolutely necessary. At first, the students thought it would be easy. Within an hour, they discovered something shocking. Nearly every conversation they started returned to themselves, my experience, my success, my problem, my idea. The ego wasn't just influencing their lives, it was narrating them, every moment, without pause. By the end of the week, many students described an unexpected feeling. The silence inside their minds had grown wider, not empty, peaceful, as if a lifelong argument had finally ended, and standing before them, the old master quietly asked one final question. If the voice in your head stopped speaking forever, would you disappear? Or would you finally meet the one who has been listening all along, the quiet purpose, discovering ikigai beyond the ego? The students couldn't answer. The master's question remained suspended in the silence. If the voice inside your head suddenly disappeared, who would be left? For a moment, no one reached for an answer, because every answer belonged to the voice itself, the one trying to explain, to justify, to protect, to become. The master looked toward the mountains. The morning mist slowly lifted from the valley below. You spend your lives chasing yourselves, he said softly. But have you ever noticed? The one doing the chasing is the one being chased. The students frowned. The words sounded impossible. How could the hunter and the prey be the same? The master picked up a small lantern. Its flame burned quietly. He held it toward the rising sun. Does the lantern make the sun brighter? The students smiled. Of course not. It only shines because the sun has not yet risen. The master lowered the lantern. When truth appears, the ego has nothing left to illuminate. The lesson settled gently into the morning air. The ego spends its entire life trying to become the light. It wants recognition, importance, control, but wisdom never competes. It simply shines. Across Japan, hidden between mountains, forests, and quiet villages, people have lived by an idea that has fascinated the world for decades. A single word: ikigai. Today, many people describe ikigai as the intersection of passion, talent, mission, and career. Diagrams are drawn, books are written, seminars are held, but the original spirit of ikigai is much simpler and much quieter. It doesn't ask, how can I become extraordinary? It asks, what makes waking up tomorrow worth it? Notice the difference. One question belongs to the ego, the other belongs to life. Imagine an old fisherman living on a small Japanese island. He has no famous name, no social media, no expensive possessions. Every morning before sunrise, he walks toward the sea. He repairs his nets with patience. He greets his neighbors. He watches the horizon change color. He returns home carrying enough fish for the day. No more. No less. To someone obsessed with ambition, his life may appear ordinary. To someone who understands ikigai, his life is complete, because purpose isn't measured by applause, it's measured by meaning. Researchers who visited Okinawa, one of the world's famous blue zones where many people live exceptionally long lives, noticed something remarkable. Many older adults continued living with purpose well into their 90s and even beyond. Not because they were chasing retirement dreams, not because they were trying to become famous, but because they still felt useful. One cared for a garden, another taught children, another crafted pottery, another played music. Purpose wasn't a destination. It was woven into everyday life. And perhaps that explains something many modern societies struggle to understand. The happiest lives are not always the most exciting. Often, they are the most meaningful. Imagine two builders. The first counts every brick. He dreams only of payday. Every hour feels heavy. Every day feels longer than the last. The second builder places the very same bricks. But in his mind, he is building a temple. A place where generations will gather, children will laugh, families will pray, memories will be made. Both perform identical work. One feels trapped, the other feels alive. The difference isn't the task, it's the meaning attached to it. The ego searches for reward. Purpose discovers value. This idea echoes through modern psychology. Researchers studying well-being have repeatedly found that people who pursue meaning tend to experience greater long-term life satisfaction than those focused primarily on status, pleasure, or external success. Pleasure fades, recognition fades, possessions lose their excitement, but meaning often grows stronger with time. Ancient Japan arrived at this realization centuries earlier. Not through experiments, through observation. The people who smiled the most were rarely the people with the most. They were often the people most connected to what they were doing. There is an old Japanese craftsman who spends nearly every day making handmade paper. The process has barely changed for hundreds of years. Visitors once asked him, "Don't you ever become bored doing the same thing?" The old man laughed gently. "The paper changes every day. The weather changes. My hands change. I change. So how could the work ever be the same?" What a remarkable way to see the world. The ego craves constant novelty. Wisdom discovers endless depth in ordinary things. Imagine drinking tea. Most people finish the cup while thinking about tomorrow. The Zen practitioner tastes the warmth, feels the texture, listens to the steam rising. For those few moments, nothing else exists. Life isn't postponed. It is happening right now. But then, the master told his students a story that none of them expected. A famous archer once approached an elderly Zen teacher. "I have become the greatest archer in the region. My aim is perfect. My reputation is unmatched." The teacher nodded. "And who are you?" "If someone takes away your bow," the archer smiled confidently, "I would simply earn another." The teacher shook his head. "You answered about the bow. I asked about you." The archer suddenly fell silent. For the first time, he realized his entire identity rested upon something outside himself. Without his skill, who was he? Without admiration, who remained? Without victory, what would be left? That question haunted him for years, because it exposed the quiet danger hidden inside every achievement. Achievements are beautiful until they become identity. Then they become chains. Imagine standing before a mirror. Each success places another mask over your face. Employee, leader, parent, artist, scholar, winner. The masks become so familiar, you eventually forget there is a face beneath them. The ego spends a lifetime polishing the masks. Zen quietly invites you to remove them, not because success is wrong, but because no mask can ever become your true self. As evening approached, the master and his students sat beneath a blooming cherry tree. The wind was almost still. Then, without warning, a single blossom drifted to the ground. No one spoke. Another followed, then another. Soon, the air filled with soft pink petals dancing toward the earth. The master smiled. The blossom never mourns, becoming the soil. It understands that losing one form is how life creates another. The students watched in silence. For the first time, the falling petals no longer looked like an ending. They looked like freedom. And then the master whispered the words that would remain with them forever. The ego asks, how long can I keep this? Wisdom asks, how deeply can I appreciate it before it passes? Those two questions would determine the direction of an entire life. But one final lesson still remained. The deepest lesson of all. It was not about purpose or success or silence. It was about death, because the Japanese believed that only by understanding the certainty of death could a person finally learn how to live completely free, the shadow that sets you free. The cherry blossoms continued to fall, one by one, without fear, without hesitation. None of the petals struggled to remain on the branch. None demanded one more day. They simply surrendered to the wind. The students watched in silence. One finally asked, Master, how can something so beautiful disappear so peacefully? The old man closed his eyes. It disappears peacefully, because it never believed it could stay forever. The words settled into the evening like the last rays of sunlight. For a long time, no one spoke. Then the master looked toward the distant mountains. There is one teacher that never lies. It visits every emperor, every warrior, every monk, every child. No one can escape it. The students already knew the answer. Death. Just hearing the word made their bodies tense. Their breathing became shallow. One student lowered his gaze. Another looked away. The master noticed, Abe, you fear the word, not because death has arrived, but because the ego cannot imagine a world without itself. Every civilization has searched for immortality. Ancient kings built enormous tombs, emperors searched for magical elixirs, scientists dreamed of extending life forever. Today, technology promises to slow aging, to upload memories, to preserve consciousness. Different centuries, different tools, the same desire to escape the inevitable. But ancient Japan approached the question differently. Instead of asking, how do we avoid death? Many Zen teachers asked, what changes when we stop running from it? Single question transformed everything. The samurai understood this better than almost anyone. To outsiders, it seemed impossible. How could someone walk calmly into battle, knowing death might come before sunset? The answer wasn't fearlessness. It was acceptance. One of the most influential texts of the samurai tradition, Hagakure, contains a striking idea. The way of the warrior is found in death. For centuries, many people misunderstood those words. They imagined they encouraged recklessness, blind sacrifice, or a fascination with dying. But that was never the heart of the teaching. The lesson was far more profound. When you fully accept that life is temporary, fear begins to lose its grip. Imagine holding a handful of sand. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers. Open your hand, and it rests there naturally. Life works in much the same way. The ego squeezes, wisdom opens. Think about how much of human anxiety comes from trying to control what cannot be controlled. The future, other people's opinions, aging, loss, change, death. It's like trying to command the tides. No matter how loudly you shout, the ocean continues its rhythm. The Japanese learned to respect this rhythm rather than resist it. Not because they were passive, because they understood the difference between influence and control. A bamboo tree cannot stop the wind, but it can learn to bend. Modern psychology echoes this ancient insight. Studies on acceptance have found that people often suffer less when they stop fighting unavoidable realities. Pain may still exist, loss still hurts, grief remains real, but resistance no longer adds a second layer of suffering. The Buddhists described this centuries ago with a simple image. Being struck by one arrow is painful. Being struck by a second arrow that you shoot into yourself through resistance is optional. The first arrow is life. The second arrow is the ego. One evening, a young monk approached his teacher. "I am terrified of dying." The teacher looked at him kindly. "Have you finished living?" The monk hesitated. "I don't know." The teacher smiled. "Then begin there." No long sermon, no complicated philosophy, only one question. Because fear of death often hides another fear beneath it. The fear of never truly living. How many dreams remain untouched because of fear? How many words of love remain unspoken? How many friendships end because pride refuses to apologize? How many mornings pass unnoticed while we hurry toward a future that never seems to arrive? The ego is always preparing to live. Wisdom is already living. There is an old Japanese legend about a monk who carried a small human skull wherever he traveled. People thought he had gone mad. Children ran away. Villagers whispered behind his back. One day, a traveler finally gathered the courage to ask, "Why do you carry such a terrible thing?" The monk gently placed the skull in his hands. "So I remember." Remember what? That every argument ends here. Every title ends here. Every victory, every defeat, every beautiful face, every fortune. This skull reminds me to stop wasting today. The traveler stared silently at the empty eye sockets. For the first time, he wasn't looking at death. He was looking at life. The Japanese have long practiced an awareness of impermanence that quietly shapes everyday existence. The changing seasons, the blooming cherry blossoms, the fading autumn leaves, the first snowfall, none are seen as interruptions. They are the very rhythm of life itself. Imagine if winter never arrived, spring would lose its wonder. Imagine if night never came, sunrise would no longer feel miraculous. Contrast creates appreciation. Endings create meaning. Death gives urgency to love, time gives value to moments, impermanence gives beauty to existence. The master led his students to the temple cemetery before dawn. Mist drifted between ancient stone markers. Birdsong had not yet begun. The world seemed suspended between darkness and light. The students expected sadness. Instead, the master smiled. Look carefully. The graves were covered with moss. Tiny flowers grew between the stones. Butterflies moved quietly through the morning air. Life surrounded death, not as its enemy, but as its companion. The master whispered, "Nothing here has disappeared. It has only changed." The students looked around. For the first time, the cemetery felt less like an ending, more like a continuation. The leaves became soil, the soil nourished trees, the trees sheltered birds, the birds scattered seeds. Life endlessly transformed itself. Nature had been teaching this lesson all along. Only humans insisted on calling it loss. As the sun slowly rose, one student finally asked, "Master, if death is certain, what should we do with the time we have?" The old man smiled, not because the answer was easy, because it was beautifully simple. Become fully alive. Nothing more, nothing less. Not famous, not powerful, not admired. Alive. Completely. Deeply. Awake. The students felt something shift inside them, not because they had conquered the fear of death, but because they had finally begun to understand its gift. Death was never the enemy. The unlived life was. And as they walked back toward the temple, the master knew there was only one lesson left to teach. The final lesson, not about death, not about purpose, not even about the ego, but about the quiet freedom that appears when there is no longer anyone left inside you who needs to win. The freedom of becoming nobody. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, the kind that feels alive. The students walked behind their master as the first light of dawn poured over the mountains. The air was cool. The scent of pine drifted through the valley. For the first time since arriving at the monastery, no one hurried. No one searched for another answer. No one tried to impress the teacher. Something inside them had become lighter, not because life had become easier, because they had finally begun to set something down, the ego. The master stopped beside an ancient pine tree. Its roots gripped the mountainside. Its trunk bore the scars of countless winters. Lightning had struck it decades before. Storms had twisted its branches. Snow had bent it toward the earth. Yet there it stood, Not perfect, not symmetrical, not young, still alive, still growing. The master placed his hand gently against the bark. This tree has never wished to become another tree. It has never envied the bamboo. It has never competed with the cherry blossom. It simply became completely itself. The students looked at the pine in silence. How strange. Nature never compared itself. Only people did. A rose never apologized for not being an oak. The moon never envied the sun. The river never wished it could fly. Comparison was not a law of life. It was a habit of the ego. Imagine standing in a forest. Thousands of trees surround you. Some are tall, some are small, some are ancient, some have only just begun to grow, yet none of them are trying to prove they deserve to exist. They simply exist. Only human beings ask themselves, am I enough? That question has fueled countless achievements, but it has also fueled countless sleepless nights. How many careers have been built from insecurity? How many fortunes have been accumulated? Not from joy, but from the fear of being ordinary? The ego believes worth must be earned. Zen quietly whispers something radical. You were never born without worth. You were born before you ever achieved anything, before anyone praised you, before anyone criticized you, before success, before failure. Your value existed first. Everything else came later. A young student stepped forward, Master. If there is no ego, will I lose my ambition? The old man smiled. Do flowers stop blooming when no one is watching? The student thought for a long moment. No. They bloom because it is their nature. The master nodded. Exactly. The ego works for applause. The heart works because it is alive. That distinction changes everything. Without ego, people still create, still build, still dream, still love. But now, the work is no longer chained to identity. Failure becomes a lesson. Success becomes gratitude. Neither becomes the self. This is perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about letting go of the ego. Many people imagine becoming passive, unmotivated, emotionless, detached from life. The opposite is true. The ego doesn't create passion. It often distorts it. Think about the greatest athletes, musicians, artists, surgeons. Many describe moments when they disappeared into the work. Time vanished. Self-consciousness vanished. Only the task remained. Those moments produced some of their finest performances. Not because they tried harder, because the self briefly stepped aside. The Japanese swordsman didn't become slower by quieting his mind. He became more precise. The tea master didn't become careless. He became completely present. The calligrapher didn't lose creativity. The brush simply moved without hesitation. The ego constantly interrupts. Presence allows life to flow. The master picked up a small mirror. He handed it to the nearest student. What do you see? My face. The master breathed gently onto the glass. Mist covered the reflection. Now what do you see? Nothing. The master wiped the mirror clean. The mirror never lost its ability to reflect. It was only temporarily covered. The students understood. Awareness itself never disappears. It simply becomes hidden beneath fear, anger, comparison, attachment. The ego is not the mirror. It is the fog. And fog always lifts. The sun had climbed higher into the sky. Birdsong echoed through the valley. The monastery slowly awakened. Monks swept stone paths. A kettle began to whistle. Someone laughed quietly in the distance. Life continuing felt different. The students realized something astonishing. Freedom had not arrived because the world changed. Freedom arrived because the way they looked at the world had changed. The mountains were the same. The trees were the same, the wind was the same, only the observer had changed, or perhaps the observer had finally stopped interfering. The master invited them to walk to the highest point overlooking the valley. Far below, villages awakened, smoke curled from small houses, farmers stepped into their fields, children chased one another across narrow roads, merchants opened wooden shutters, life unfolded naturally. No one announced the sunrise. No one commanded the birds to sing. No one reminded the flowers to bloom. Everything happened without needing recognition. The master stretched out his hand. Life already knows how to live. The question is, can you stop getting in its way? The students smiled. For months, they had searched for complicated answers. The deepest truth had been astonishingly simple. One student asked quietly, Master, how will we know if we have truly defeated the ego? The old man laughed. You won't. The students looked puzzled. If someone believes, I have no ego anymore, The ego has simply found a more spiritual disguise. The students burst into laughter. The master joined them. Even enlightenment could become another identity, another achievement, another possession. The ego was endlessly clever. It could hide behind wealth, behind poverty, behind success, behind failure, even behind humility itself. That is why awareness must remain lifelong, not as a struggle, as a friendship with reality. Years later, the students left the monastery. Some became teachers, some returned to farming, some became craftsmen, some served their communities quietly. None became famous. History forgot most of their names, and yet their lives became their greatest teaching. One repaired broken bridges, another planted trees he would never see fully grown, one cared for abandoned children, another quietly copied ancient texts so future generations would not lose them. No monuments were built in their honor. No songs celebrated their deeds. Still, the world became a little kinder because they had lived. The ego asks, will people remember me? Wisdom asks, did I leave the world more peaceful than I found it? Perhaps that has always been the quiet lesson hidden inside Japanese philosophy. The strongest person is not the one who defeats everyone else. It is the one who no longer needs to. The richest person is not the one who owns the most. It is the one who is no longer owned by desire. The wisest person is not the one who knows every answer. It is the one who never stops learning. And the freest person is not the one who escapes the world. It is the one who walks through it without carrying the unbearable weight of proving who they are. Tonight, somewhere in Japan, a temple bell will ring. Its sound will drift across mountains, through forests, over quiet rivers until it slowly disappears into the night. No one tries to hold the sound. No one chases its echo. Its beauty exists precisely because it fades. Perhaps life is the same. Perhaps every breath, every friendship, every sunrise, every heartbreak, every beginning and every ending is inviting us toward the same quiet realization. You were never meant to become the loudest voice in the room. You were never meant to spend your life chasing an image that could never satisfy you. You were never broken. You were never incomplete. Beneath every fear, every title, every victory, every failure, there has always been something still, something silent, something free. The Japanese masters spent centuries pointing toward that place, not because they wanted people to escape life, but because they wanted them to experience it fully. And perhaps the greatest victory is not conquering the world. It is waking up one ordinary morning, looking at the sky, taking one slow breath, and realizing there is nothing left to prove, only a life waiting to be lived. The final lesson, the empty cup. Many years passed. The old master had grown weaker. His hair, once dark as midnight, had become the color of fresh snow. The lines on his face had deepened. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared his morning tea. But his eyes were exactly the same, clear, still, peaceful. News spread quietly through the mountains. The master's life was nearing its end. One by one, former students returned to the temple. Some had become respected teachers. Some had built families. Some had become craftsmen whose work was admired across the country. A few had become wealthy. Others had remained poor. Their lives had taken different paths. Yet they all carried the same question. What would be the master's final teaching? Would he reveal one last hidden secret, one profound meditation, one final truth that would explain everything? The temple courtyard filled with familiar faces. The students sat in silence. No one spoke. The old master slowly entered the room. Every movement was deliberate, every step unhurried. He bowed. Then, without saying a single word, he began making tea. The students exchanged confused glances. The kettle began to sing. Steam rose into the morning air. The master carefully measured the tea leaves. He poured the hot water. He waited. Nothing extraordinary happened. Minutes passed. Still no lesson. Still no speech. Still no revelation. Finally, the tea was ready. The master handed a bowl to each student. They drank quietly. The tea was warm, simple, perfect. When everyone had finished, the master picked up the empty bowl. He held it in both hands. Then he asked, "What gives this bowl its value?" One student answered, "The clay." Another said, "The craftsmanship." A third replied, "The beauty." The old man smiled gently. "No." He turned the bowl upside down, then back again. "The bowl is useful because it is empty." The room became completely silent. The students had heard these words before, but today they landed differently. The master continued, If this bowl were solid, it could hold nothing. Its emptiness is not its weakness. It is its purpose. He looks slowly at each face. The human heart is the same. When it is full of pride, there is no room for wisdom. When it is full of certainty, there is no room for learning. When it is full of fear, there is no room for love. When it is full of self, there is no room for life. No one moved. The crackling fire was the only sound in the room. Outside, a gentle breeze carried a few cherry blossom petals through the open doorway. One landed beside the master's empty tea bowl. He smiled. You have spent years asking me, how do I defeat the ego? He paused. That was the wrong question. The students leaned forward. The ego is like your shadow. If you fight it, it fights back. If you run from it, it follows. But if you simply walk toward the light, the shadow quietly falls behind you. The students looked at one another. For years, they had been treating the ego like an enemy. The master had just revealed something far deeper. The goal was never to destroy it. The goal was to stop obeying it. One of the oldest students finally spoke. Master, will the ego ever disappear completely? The old man laughed softly. No. It will visit you every day. It will whisper. It will compare. It will complain. It will promise happiness tomorrow. It will ask you to become someone greater. The student lowered his head. Then how do we live with it? The master answered with one sentence. Smile at it, but don't give it the keys. Laughter spread gently through the room. Even after all these years, the lesson was astonishingly simple. The ego was not the driver. It was only a passenger. The moment it grabbed the wheel, life became suffering. The master slowly stood. With effort, he walked outside. The students followed him into the temple garden. The same garden where they had trained years before. The rocks were unchanged. The bamboo still bent gracefully in the wind. The old pine tree had grown stronger. The pond reflected the blue sky without effort. The master pointed toward the water. When the pond is still, it reflects everything. When the mind is still, it understands everything it needs. He picked up a small stone. He dropped it into the pond. Ripples spread outward. Then, slowly, the water became calm again. Thoughts are the ripples. You are the water. Never confuse the two. The afternoon sun slowly descended. The students realized this would likely be the last time they heard their teacher speak. One asked through tears, Master, what is the meaning of life? The old man looked surprised. Asking that question is like asking, what is the meaning of music? No one answered. You don't listen to music to reach the final note. If that were true, the shortest song would be the greatest. You listen because every note is alive. He smiled. Life is not a problem to solve. It is a song to hear. The students felt tears fill their eyes. How many years had they spent trying to arrive somewhere? Trying to become enough? Trying to earn peace? The master had spent his entire life pointing toward the same truth. Peace had never been waiting at the end of the journey. It had quietly walked beside them all along. As evening arrived, the temple bell rang across the valley. Its deep sound echoed through the mountains, then faded into silence. The master closed his eyes. Do you hear it? One student whispered. The bell has stopped. The master opened his eyes. No. Listen again. Everyone became completely still. Beyond the fading echo, there was only silence. The master smiled. That silence has been here before the bell. It remained during the bell. It is still here after the bell. He gently placed his hand over his heart. So are you. Those were the last words he ever spoke. The master passed away peacefully before dawn. No monument marked the place. No grand ceremony announced his passing, just a small stone beneath an old pine tree. Seasons came and went, cherry blossoms bloomed and fell. Snow covered the temple, then melted. Children grew old, students became masters, generations changed, the world continued its endless movement. But the master's teaching remained, not in books alone, not in temples, not in statues. It lived in quiet moments, in a craftsman completely absorbed in his work, in a parent listening without distraction, in a stranger choosing kindness over pride, in someone admitting I was wrong, in someone forgiving, in someone letting go, in someone sitting beneath a tree, watching the wind move through the leaves, with absolutely nothing left to prove. Perhaps that has always been the deepest secret of Japanese wisdom. Inner freedom is not something you achieve, it is something you uncover. It was never hidden by the world. It was hidden by the noise, by the endless story of me, by the constant hunger to become. The moment that story softens, life begins to speak, not in words, but in rain falling on bamboo, in the warmth of a bowl of tea, in the laughter of a child, in the scent of spring after winter, in the silence between two breaths. The ego spends a lifetime asking, how can I become more? Wisdom quietly asks, what remains when I stop pretending to be anything at all? And perhaps that question, asked sincerely, is the beginning of true freedom. The beginning. Hidden at the end, years became decades. The old temple remained, its wooden beams weathered countless storms. Its stone paths slowly softened beneath thousands of footsteps. The cherry trees bloomed every spring. The bamboo continued to sway with every passing wind. Visitors still arrived from distant places. Some came searching for enlightenment. Others hoped to escape suffering. Many carried notebooks, questions, expectations. Almost all of them believed they were arriving at the end of a journey. They were wrong. The journey had only just begun. One spring morning, a young traveler climbed the mountain to the temple. He was not a monk. He was not a scholar. He was simply exhausted. His clothes were neat. His shoes were expensive. His phone buzzed constantly in his pocket. Even at the top of the mountain, messages continued arriving. Emails, news, opinions, requests. He had everything he once dreamed of. A successful career, a comfortable home, recognition from strangers. People admired him. They called him successful. Yet every night he lay awake, not because he lacked comfort, because he lacked peace. He had come to the temple with one question: how do I finally become happy? An elderly monk welcomed him. Without answering, the monk handed him a broom. The young man looked confused. I came for wisdom. The monk smiled. So did the floor. For the next 3 days, the traveler swept leaves, carried water, prepared simple meals, cleaned wooden hallways. No lectures, no secret techniques, no mystical experiences. By the 4th day, frustration overflowed. I didn't climb this mountain to become a servant. The monk quietly asked, who told you serving was beneath you? The words landed like a stone in still water. The traveler opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, he noticed the voice inside him. The voice that constantly ranked everything: important, unimportant, success, failure, winning, losing. The broom had become a mirror. That afternoon, the monk invited him to sit beneath a maple tree. Autumn had not yet arrived. The leaves were bright green. The monk pointed upward. What color will those leaves become? Red. When? In autumn. The monk nodded. Can you pull them until they turn red today? The traveler laughed. Of course not. Nature has its own time, the monk smiled. And why do you refuse to give yourself the same patience? Silence. The traveler suddenly realized he had spent years pulling at his own life, demanding faster success, faster healing, faster happiness, faster answers. He had treated himself more harshly than nature ever would. That evening, rain began to fall, softly, steadily. The traveler watched droplets strike the temple roof. Master. I've spent my whole life trying to control everything, my future, my reputation, my relationships, my success, and somehow I've never felt more afraid. The monk poured another bowl of tea. When you try to control the rain, what happens? Nothing. When you open an umbrella, you stay dry. The monk nodded. Wisdom is knowing the difference. Control what you can. Accept what you cannot. Meet reality. Instead of arguing with it. As the days passed, something subtle began to change. The traveler no longer rushed through his work. He noticed birds singing before sunrise. He noticed the smell of cedar after rain. He noticed how warm a bowl of rice felt in cold hands. He noticed his own breathing, not because life had become extraordinary, because he had finally stopped overlooking the ordinary. And perhaps the ordinary had been extraordinary all along. Before leaving, the traveler asked one final question. What should I do when I return to the world? The monk looked surprised. Return? You never left the world, he smiled gently. The mountain is not sacred. Your attention is. The traveler frowned. I don't understand. The monk pointed toward the empty tea bowl resting beside them. You think peace lives here. It doesn't. If you cannot find peace while washing dishes, you will never find it on a mountain. If you cannot be present in traffic, you will not suddenly become present in a temple. If you cannot love ordinary mornings, extraordinary moments will never satisfy you. The traveler lowered his eyes. He had been searching for a different life. The monk had shown him a different way of living the same life. The next morning he bowed deeply. He began walking back down the mountain. Nothing around him had changed. The road was the same. The trees were the same. The clouds drifted across the same sky. Yet everything felt different. Not because the world had transformed, because the one walking through it had. For the first time in years, he reached into his pocket. His phone vibrated. He looked at the screen, then smiled. He placed it back into his pocket. The message could wait. This sunrise could not. Months later, friends noticed something unusual. He still worked hard, still pursued excellence, still made plans, still dreamed, but there was no desperation behind it anymore. Failure no longer shattered him. Success no longer defined him. Praise felt pleasant. Criticism became useful. Neither determined his worth. He had not become perfect. He had become present. And that changed everything. Perhaps that is the greatest misunderstanding about inner freedom. It does not ask you to abandon ambition. It asks you to abandon attachment. It does not ask you to reject success. It asks you not to build your identity upon it. It does not ask you to stop loving. It asks you to stop possessing. It does not ask you to withdraw from life. It invites you to enter life completely. Somewhere in Japan, at this very moment, a temple bell is ringing, a tea master is preparing a bowl of matcha with quiet care, an elderly gardener is sweeping fallen leaves that will return again tomorrow. A child is laughing beneath blooming cherry blossoms. A bamboo forest is bending with the wind. None of them are trying to become extraordinary. They are simply present, and perhaps that is the most extraordinary thing a human being can ever learn, because in a world constantly telling you to become more, the oldest wisdom of Japan quietly offers another path. Be fully here, be deeply aware, be kind without needing credit, work without clinging to the result, love without trying to possess, walk without needing to arrive. And when the day finally comes, when your own story reaches its final page, may you be able to look back, not with regret for the life you were too busy chasing, but with gratitude for the ordinary moments you were awake enough to truly live. The old masters left no secret formula, no magical shortcut, only a simple invitation that has echoed through Japanese temples for centuries. Empty your cup, quiet your mind, open your heart, and discover that the freedom you search for across the world has been quietly waiting within you all along. The end.